Welcome to the What Matters Today podcast from the Geneva Graduate Institute. I'm Dan Graham, Head of Communications at the Institute. In this podcast series, we ask members of our faculty to comment on key global issues. In this episode, we unpack the recent 12-day confrontation between Iran and Israel and ask, will the ceasefire last? We explore who's gaining from the current unrest and who's paying the price. We also look at what could follow if the Islamic Republic were to fall, what political or social alternatives might emerge, what would that mean for the region, for global powers, and for the future of U.S. Iran diplomacy. My guest today is Clément Therme, an alumnus and former visiting lecturer here at the Geneva Graduate Institute. Could you remind us of the key points from the 12 days of confrontation between Iran and Israel? And do you think the ceasefire will hold?
Yes, thank you for this excellent question. I think the first issue is to remember that this 12 days war was not something new in Israeli strategic thinking and even in the US, Right. So we are talking about this kind of military intervention since the beginning of the 2000. You remember the Iraq War of 2003? Yes. And at the time of George W. Bush presidency, we were saying Iran next. So it was Iraq first, right, and then Iran. That's very important because this debate is very old. So what is the best mean to manage Iranian nuclear ambition? Is this diplomacy, covert operation, or military intervention? So even under George W. Bush in 2008, the decision was not to bomb Iran. Right. And because, the situation in Afghanistan, in Iraq was very difficult for the U.S. Military forces. So it was not perceived as a positive option to open a third front at the time. But under Obama, the debate was more about covert operation versus economic pressure. And then you have this idea under Obama to have both at the same time. So the killing of nuclear scientists in Iran starting at the beginning of 2010s. And then you have also the economic pressure. So the unilateral US sanction targeting especially the oil and automotive sector in Iran. And that was very difficult for Iran. And since then, Iran was disconnected with the SWIFT banking system. So the idea was to play the carrot and stick approach and to manage the nuclear ambition of Iran through a means of diplomatic incentives and economic pressure, plus covert operation, secret, right, infiltration by Israel. And at the time, that led us to the GPOA first 2013, GCPOA 2015. And at the time, the debate appeared as solved, that the diplomatic solution is the best option. Right. And then you have the US unilateral withdrawal from the GCPOA in 2018. And since then, you have this dynamic of escalation. And even when Biden was elected president and tried to re-enter the GCPOA, it was not possible because of many reasons, because of the war in Ukraine, and the Iranian support to Russia war efforts that changed the European position. And also because, it was a crisis of trust. So it was very difficult to re-enter the same agreement that failed before. So it's a common sense, view about it's very difficult to go twice to the same diplomatic solution. So that's why when Trump arrived, he said the deadline is 60 days to find a nuclear solution. And I think more than the direct or indirect negotiation that was going on before the war, the fifth round was scheduled 2 days after the military intervention of Israel. I think the difficulty was the deadline because it was impossible to sign in 60 days. And Israel took advantage of this arrogant statement from the US administration. And that's why that opened a window of opportunity for the Prime Minister of Israel that were trying to pressure US president for more than 2 or 3 decades to solve military the Iranian nuclear problem. And now the key issue is what is the result and does the ceasefire will hold. So the key result, I think everyone is pretending victory. So there is the Iranian side, I think, because the Islamic Republic survived. Right. It's a victory of Ayatollah Khamenei. From the Israeli point of view, the tactical, military success, especially in the first day, the targeting of military commander, nuclear scientists. So they say also it's a success. And from the U.S. perspective, because of the short, one-shot military intervention by Donald Trump, he said he can address two key constituencies, the MAGA constituency, saying this is not a new endless war. And also to reassess, the U.S. deterrent and to play the card of a strong leader. So he said it's victory also. But this is very short-term, talking points from military players involved in the battle. But I think in the long term, the problem is not solved. And there is no long-term military solution. So what we can see for the next years is maybe new like one-shot military intervention, like it was the case in Iraq between 1991 and 2003, or a switch towards a real military regime change strategy. Because the Islamic Republic has two options. Either they compromise, they find, a diplomatic solution because their ideological ambition does not correspond to their military capability. So they have a problem there to address. And also because of the Israeli infiltration. Or either they double down on revolutionary ideology. And that will depend also about the survival of the supreme leader Ali Khamenei, because he is the main obstacle to the U.S. Iran hostile relationship. So as long as he's in charge, either he will die, because of age, because he's 86, or it will be eliminated, and that will be a significant evolution regarding international law also, because he's head of state. He's not only Ayatollah, he has a double function, he has a political function and a religious one. So it's a very sensitive debate now, the succession of the supreme leader in Iran. And I think that is one of the determining factor for the ceasefire to hold or not.
Who is truly benefiting from the current conflict in Iran, and who's paying the price?
So, as I said, the political system in the U.S., Israel, and Iran pretends victory, and they claim that it's victors for different reasons. But I think that the victims are clearly the civilian in Iran, because they have to face now a difficult economic situation, even more difficult than before. So the currency is falling, the inflation is rising, and the prospect to ease economic sanction is more difficult to attain now after the military intervention. And also because before the strikes, I think one of the key tools for the Islamic Republic to govern Iran was to say it's either us or the chaos. And now they have the Islamic Republic of Iran political system plus the risk of insecurity, from the point of view of the citizen of Iran. So the humanitarian consequences, you have hundreds of arrests, hundreds of civilians being killed, and you have a security atmosphere in Iran, especially in the capital Tehran, but also in the Kurdish provinces or Khuzestan, in the Arab part of Iran. So I think the situation can become even more difficult for people living inside Iran, and we can forecast a new wave of migrants from Iran, depending on the stabilization in the coming years. So that clearly the main losers are inside Iran. But after all, the military victory of Israel and the US are short-lived also, because without regime change, this is not a positive political outcome. It can be a short-term military success, but politically, it's very risky, because you can have a more extreme Islamic Republic of Iran foreign policy and the risk of regional destabilization. And I think the reason the ceasefire was decided is the risk of an extension of the conflict. That is, Iran and Israel are the distances between 1,500 kilometers and 2,000 kilometers. So that limits the possibility of military confrontation. But also Iran can choose to strike energy facilities in the region, because you have the Hormuz Strait and you have 30% of the oil trade, maritime oil trade that is transiting every day, and it's also a region where you have oil production, and that strategically is very important crossroads. And also, Iran is exporting 80% of its oil through the Persian Gulf. And Israel chose not to target these oil terminals. That could change, the nature of the conflict. So the risk now is to have an extension of the conflict in case it restarts, and also economic consequences for the global economy also.
If the Islamic Republic regime were to collapse, what political or social alternatives could emerge?
So the main alternative is inside Iran, because, you have a civil society, you have a strong middle class inside the country, you have elite, like artist elite, you have cinema, you have sport. So it's a very competitive country in terms of society and intellectual and cultural development. So I think that the main alternative are inside Iranian jails. We say that the Evin prison is the main university in Iran. So the elite is not inside the political system, is also the victim of the political system. So regime change is perceived as a negative outcome, in security circles in the West because of the failed experience of Afghanistan and Iraq.
Right.
But in terms of Iranian society, there is a very different view on that. And one key example, we say all the time that there is no alternative to the Islamic Republic. This is a talking point of the regime that is repeated worldwide, even in intellectual elite in the West. But the reality is that there is a potential inside Iran for a better political system if it's taking into account the preference of the Iranian population. And the problem with the Islamic Republic is that it was not able to propose a real reform of the political institution.
Right.
And the key issue was the position of the supreme leader. So I think also the opposition is divided since 2022 and the women life freedom movement inside Iran, because the possibility of regime change became a real probability, a real possibility. So since then, the division is very strong outside Iran. And the polarization is around the crown prince, Reza Pahlavi, who has the most support according to independent survey inside Iran, 39%. But it's a dividing figure because of the 1979 Islamic Revolution, legacy. And you have a lot of conflict between the Iranian left, the monarchists, and so there is this problem of historical legacy for him to overcome. But it's a symbol, of national unity, because the issue of the flag also, the Islamic Republic chose a flag that is not representing the Iranian nation and is not the traditional flag of Iran. So when you heard about rallying behind the flag, you have to be careful which flag we are talking about.
Right.
So the Islamic Republic cannot organize a national unity. What they can achieve is internal coherence. So to limit internal infighting and to solve the issue of Israeli infiltration for the security apparatus. But in terms of representing an alternative, a change from within, that is the hope, in the West because of the fear of regime change.
Yeah.
That can happen, I think, only after the passing of the supreme leader, because he is the proponent of this revolutionary ideology that is transnational and against the national interest of Iran. And even if the opponents outside Iran are dividing and fighting against each other, and this is a chance for the survival of the Islamic Republic, the success of the Persian TV channel inside Iran, especially Iran International and BBC Persian, Voice of America, despite the financial cut decided by Elon Musk, I think that shows that this idea of Iran, this other Iran, exists inside Iran. Because if an Iranian citizen is able to choose which TV channel he will watch for the news, he will not choose IRIB, the national TV. He will choose the TV supporting the opponent outside. So you have to be very careful. There is a soft power of the diaspora that is very strong. And this Western tendency to oppose people inside and people outside, I think it's a bit like repeating the talking points of the government of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
What would be the regional repercussions of a regime change in Iran?
So it depends which regime change. If the takeover of the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guards, is different than the rise of Reza Pahlavi. So there is a wide range of options for regime change in Iran. So if the Islamic Republic survive in a more confrontational approach because of Israeli operation that will continue maybe in terms of covert operation or maybe even open military attack, that will maybe provoke the rise of a more militarized Islamic Republic, and that will endanger the regional security, but also the energy security of the global economy. So the consequence can be very important, not only for the region, but also for the global economy in the short term. But after, if a new regime emerge, taking it into account the national interest of Iran, not the revolutionary ideology of Ayatollah Khomeini and the supreme leader Ayatollah Khamenei, I think this is a chance also for the region to go for stability and to focus on economic development rather than military investment and ideological enterprise. So I think that the youth, even outside Iran, do not support the ideology of the Islamic Republic anymore. So I think that also a factor to take into account. There is no Iranian dream among the youth of Lebanon or Dubai. Nobody wants to study in Iran. Even sometimes they can side with the Islamic Republic of Iran against Israel. It was never a positive model, the Islamic Republic in the region. So that's very important also in terms of soft power. And the loss of Syria and maybe Lebanon tomorrow for Iran is a huge setback. So also there is a risk here that the Islamic Republic will try to double down on its revolutionary ideology to threaten, the rise of a new Syria and maybe a new Lebanon tomorrow. So there is also this risk, but hope that the new generation in the Middle East are different and they don't focus on this ideology of the Islamic Republic that is very old, date back from, the 60s and 70s.
What impact would a transformation of the Iranian regime have on major powers and the international order?
So I think every major power projects its own image based on the situation in Iran and the war between Iran and Israel. So when I discuss with colleagues in the region, they tell me when the U.S. think tankers and leadership talk about Iran, they don't talk about Iran, they talk about themselves. And it's very clear that when Donald Trump is talking about Iran, he's talking about Joe Biden, he's talking about Barack Obama, but he's not talking about the Iranian situation. And one proof of that is that people, proponents of regime change in the US, sometimes they don't know the population of Iran, they don't know anything about Iran, they don't speak the language, they never went to the country. So there is a gap between people who are taking the decision and their knowledge of the situation inside Iran. And so for the US, I think this is a debate about the endless war, ending the endless wars. And that's why Donald Trump presented his military operation as a one-shot one, not to have a strong confrontation with his MAGA base, popular base, and to overcome this internal issue. So in the US, it's an internal issue and highly polarized between Democrat and Republican. And they use Iran as a tool to compete between each other. So we went from regime change under George W. Bush, and after Obama in 2009, it was just talking to the supreme leader. Iran was Ayatollah Khamenei. Right. So they went to one extreme to another one. So it's really a polarized debate from inside. For Russia and China, it's different. I think they search the status quo. They don't want to be involved. So militarily, they are neutral. They try not to take side between Israel and Iran because they are calling for, desescalation and very distant position and diplomatic statement, very, neutral diplomatic statement. But at the same time, the emergence of a pro-West regime in Iran does not mean an anti-China or anti-Russia regime. The previous regime has excellent relation with China and the Soviet Union at the time. So it's not a negative, outcome. And they don't see the fall of the Islamic Republic or the potential fall of the Islamic Republic of Iran as an obvious setback. So they're very open in the way they see, and they're playing the card of authoritarian stability. So what they want is a state to remain in charge. But if there is a regime change with the survival of the Iranian state, that's fine from their point of view. And for Europe, I think the Iranian issue is a sign of the declining role of Europe in international relations. Because, between 2003 and 2008, Europe was a leading force regarding the nuclear negotiation because of, what we call the Troika at the time, France, the United Kingdom, and Germany. They signed the Paris Agreement, and there was a leading force, mediating between George W. Bush administration at the time and the Islamic Republic of Iran. And after, with the rise of Obama, there was sideline. The U.S. starting to talk directly with Iran in the Sultanate of Oman, the back channel, and with the leading role of the U.S. diplomat William Burns. And even for the JCPOA, it was Obama administration, the leading force. It was not Europe anymore. And they play the role of junior partner of the U.S. When Obama asked them to push their companies to invest in Iran after 2015, they did it. But when Trump withdrew from the agreement, the European company has to withdraw. So they couldn't stay on the Iranian market because they had to choose between the US market and the Iranian one. And most companies choose the US market, of course. So the US pressure was so strong on European private sector that they follow US guidelines. And since then, Europe is sidelined. They have this role of maybe a platform. That's why you have this meeting in Geneva some days ago during the war. But it was more because of, the region took over the role. And it's more the diplomatic meetings are now organized by Qatar, the Saudi Arabia, or the Sultanate of Oman. And Europe is not playing anymore the leading role. But they can activate snapback mechanism, so the return of the UN sanction, because until now, Iran is under US and European sanction, but not under UN sanction. And the European has a deadline before October, they can activate this sanction because the US withdrew from the JCPOA. And only the United Kingdom and France can play this card. But that will be the last card to play. Because if they reactivate the sanction, they will not be able anymore to play a mediating role. So it's a very challenging decision for European states to take now.
And for my two final questions, I think I can group them together. So the first question would be, what impact would a transformation of the Iranian regime have on major powers and the international order? And what are the prospects for renewed U.S.-Iran diplomacy following the ceasefire, and what obstacles remain?
Yeah, I think that we have a tendency to overestimate the role of the U.S. in shaping the negotiation or shaping the trajectory of Iran since 1979. I think what we can witness is that this having an effect on the internal dynamics inside the Islamic Republic, so this famous moderate conservative divide inside Iran. Now you have a moderate, so-called moderate president, Pezeshkian, and radical supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. So if Trump proposes a diplomatic opening, they can present the option of Pezeshkian. And in times of war, they present, the supreme leader and the IRGC. So it's highly manipulative, on both sides. But in terms of social movement inside Iran and seeking regime change or reform, we can see that when the US are taking both choices, opening, extending, an hand, unclench the fist, as Obama famously explained during his presidential campaign, you have the Green Movement in 2009 against the Islamic Republic. And this was at the time of a diplomatic opening. And during the Trump administration maximum pressure strategy, you have popular movement in 2017-18, 2019, seeking regime change. So both pressure or opening, extending a diplomatic end can have the same effect of you have at the same time dynamic inside Iran provoking protest. And so there is no direct link between US diplomatic choice and social movement inside Iran. That's very important to state. And after, for the other question about the capability of the US to restart a diplomatic dialogue, I think this will depend on the attitude both of the supreme leader inside Iran, that is basically against, in terms of ideology, détente with the US, but at the same time, is able to practice what he call heroic flexibility, to be pragmatic, I call it reactive pragmatism. If he thinks that the survival of the Islamic Republic is at stake, he can tactically, temporarily accept some compromise with the Trump administration through indirect negotiation. It was the diplomatic channel that was active before the war. So that can restart if he thinks that the survival of the Islamic Republic is at stake. But also there is a second factor. Can the Pax Americana prevail against, this temptation of the coup de grâce, what we call from the Israeli, Prime Minister Netanyahu? Because can he manage Netanyahu, appetite for the military solution? So
Right.
that will be key also in shaping the Iranian decision, but also the capability of the U.S. Policy to prevent another conflict to emerge in the coming weeks or months.
Well, great. Clément, thank you very much for this very interesting conversation on this very complex situation. Thanks again for joining us on What Matters Today.
Thank you, Dan.
This podcast series is produced by the Geneva Graduate Institute communications team. For more information about the Institute, please visit our website at graduateinstitute.ch. I'm Dan Graham. Thanks for listening.